Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Georgia's history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1843, when cotton bloomed across Wilkes County, Georgia, a series of events began unfolding at Whitaker Plantation that would remain buried in county records for over a century. Located 17 miles southeast of Washington, Georgia, this once prosperous estate sat nestled between rolling hills and dense oak forests, its grand white columns visible from the main road connecting Augusta to Athens. According to the few surviving documents from the Presbyterian Church archives in Macon, the mistress of this estate, Charlotte Whitaker, wife of Colonel James Whitaker, gave birth to triplets on September 8th, an event so rare at the time that it was recorded not only in church registries, but also mentioned in the Augusta Chronicle's society pages. What the newspaper failed to report, however, was the fate of the third child. The Whitaker family had been established in Georgia since 1776, when British loyalist Edmund Whitaker changed sides after witnessing the brutality of British troops in Savannah. His grandson, James, expanded the family's wealth considerably, becoming one of the largest landowners in Wilkes County by 1830. Church records indicate he married Charlotte Montgomery, daughter of a prominent Charleston family, in 1835. By all accounts preserved in county archives and personal correspondence housed at the University of Georgia's special collections, their marriage appeared respectable and productive, yielding 2 sons in quick succession. Charlotte was noted in letters exchanged between neighboring plantation mistresses as a woman of impeccable taste and stern disposition who managed the household with remarkable efficiency. Ruth Ann Turner first appears in tax records from 1838 when she was purchased along with 5 other workers for the Whitaker household. According to inventory lists from the estate, she served as Charlotte's personal attendant. Little more would be known about her were it not for a series of anomalous entries in Charlotte's household ledger, discovered during a courthouse renovation in 1962. The ledger, water-damaged but partially legible, contains household accounts, lists of supplies, and oddly, records of Ruth Ann's monthly cycles marked with small crosses in the margins. These notations stop abruptly in January 1843, around the time Charlotte would have discovered her pregnancy. The summer of 1843 was unusually hot and dry in Georgia. According to weather records kept by the Presbyterian minister Reverend Samuel Cartwright, no rain fell in Wilkes County between June 7th and August 23rd. Crops withered, livestock suffered, and tensions rose across plantations and farms alike. It was during this oppressive season that Charlotte's pregnancy progressed. Neighbors' correspondence mentions her withdrawal from society events by July, unusual for a woman who typically remained active until confinement. A letter from Augusta physician Dr. William Harrison to Colonel Whitaker, dated August 1st, suggests complications. Your wife's condition requires complete rest and avoidance of all agitation. The unusual nature of her pregnancy demands extraordinary precautions. What made this pregnancy unusual was never explicitly stated, but what followed has been pieced together through disparate sources, including church birth records, household inventories, and most significantly, a partial journal found in 1959 during the demolition of the old Whitaker House's East Wing. The journal, attributed to Ruth Ann Turner based on handwriting comparison with her mark on sale documents, contains 12 pages of entries written in a phonetic approximation of English, suggesting she taught herself to write in secret. These fragments, now preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives in Savannah, provide the only first-hand account of what transpired on the night of September 8th. According to Ruth Ann's entries, Charlotte went into labor shortly after midnight. Colonel Whitaker was away in Augusta on business. The local midwife, Mrs. Abernathy, was summoned, but arrived only after the first child had already been delivered with Ruth Ann's assistance. The birth of twins was anticipated. Dr. Harrison had apparently detected this during his examinations. What wasn't expected was a third child. Ruth Ann's journal records. The third come after Miss Charlotte thought she done, small and quiet, darker than the others, much darker. She look at it and her face change, say to me, "This one never breathed, you understand? Take it away, bury it deep where no one will find it. But the baby cry when I wrap it." What followed was recorded in fragments. Ruth Ann, according to her journal, did not bury the child. Instead, she took the infant to her quarters in the back of the property. The journal entries become increasingly anxious in tone as she describes trying to care for the child while maintaining her duties. Keep her quiet when people near. Feed her when I can slip away. Ms. Charlotte, watch me now. Her eyes follow. She knows something. The last legible entry, dated approximately 3 weeks after the birth, reads, "Colonel return tomorrow. Ms. Charlotte say she tell him I stole silver. Say they sell me south. I take the baby tonight. North Star will guide." County records confirm that in October 1843, Ruth Ann Turner was reported as having run away. A notice in the Augusta Chronicle, dated October 12th, offered a reward of $200 for her return, mentioning she may have stolen valuables from the household. No mention was made of a child. Intriguingly, medical records from Dr. Harrison note that he attended to Charlotte Whitaker for nervous exhaustion throughout October and November, prescribing laudanum and bed rest. The public narrative regarding the Whitaker triplets solidified quickly. County birth records show only 2 children registered, Thomas James and William Montgomery Whitaker. Church baptismal records from November 1843 list the same 2 boys. Colonel and Mrs. Whitaker became fixtures in local society again by spring, and letters between neighboring families mention the handsome Whitaker twins at various social gatherings. To all appearances, the matter was settled. Yet something remained unresolved within the Whitaker household. A series of household staff changes followed over the next year, with an unusual turnover of workers, according to estate records. Charlotte's correspondence, preserved fragmentarily in the University of Georgia archives, shows increasing preoccupation with security around the property. In a letter to her sister in Charleston, dated March 1844, she writes, "We have had to replace most of the household staff due to unreliability and loose tongues. James has hired a man specifically to patrol the grounds at night, as there have been concerning reports of trespassers at the edges of the property. I find I cannot sleep soundly most nights. Colonel Whitaker's business ledgers show substantial payments to a Pinkerton detective between April and August 1844, though the specific purpose is not recorded. What is documented in county records is the purchase of additional land 2 miles from the main house, a small parcel with a cabin that, according to tax records, remained unoccupied but maintained as part of the Whitaker estate. Local law preserved in oral histories, collected in the 1930s by WPA writers, suggests this remote cabin was kept for guests who needed special privacy, though no official visitors were ever recorded staying there. 5 years passed with little documentary evidence regarding the events of 1843. The Whitaker twins grew, attended by a succession of nurses and tutors. Charlotte maintained her position in local society, though several letters between neighboring women mention her increased religious devotion and occasional melancholy. Colonel Whitaker expanded his business interests, frequently traveling to Augusta, Savannah, and Charleston. Life at Whitaker Plantation had seemingly returned to normal. Then came the curious events of the autumn of 1848. According to county medical records, a fever swept through Wilkes County, affecting many households. Among those who fell ill were the Whitaker twins, then 5 years old. Dr. Harrison's records indicate he treated both boys, but could not save William, who died on October 23rd. The surviving records become peculiar at this point. Church burial records confirm William's funeral and interment in the family plot. However, Dr. Harrison's personal diary, discovered among his effects after his death and now housed in the Medical College of Georgia archives, contains a troubling entry from October 25th. Called to Whitaker Plantation again today. The situation defies medical explanation. Mrs. W. insists the surviving child is William, though I attended Thomas just yesterday. Calder W. took me aside and explained the boys were so identical that in their grief they may have confused the names. I'm not convinced this is the entire truth, but it is not my place to question further. This confusion over which twins survived appears in several sources. The tutor's records from November 1848 refer to the surviving child initially as Thomas, then the name is crossed out and replaced with William. By January 1849, all household records consistently refer to William as the surviving twin. A letter from Charlotte to her mother in Charleston, dated December 1848, states, "God in his wisdom has seen fit to preserve our dear William. Though we grieve for Thomas, we are grateful for the child who remains." William grows stronger each day and shows remarkable aptitude for his studies. What makes this particular detail disturbing is a notation in Ruth Ann Turner's journal, found on a page previously thought too water-damaged to read, but partially recovered through conservation techniques in 1967. The entry, dated shortly after the births, notes, the first boy strong and loud, the second smaller, with a small red mark behind his right ear, the third. The rest is illegible. Dr. Harrison's medical records from 1843 confirm that the twin named William had a small birthmark behind his right ear. Yet, in his 1848 diary, he notes his confusion because the surviving child showed no such mark. The years that followed brought significant changes to the Whitaker family. Colonel James Whitaker died unexpectedly in 1852, reportedly from a riding accident on the property, though rumors preserved in local oral histories suggest he may have taken his own life. Charlotte assumed management of the estate with remarkable efficiency. Their son, now consistently called William in all records, was sent to boarding school in Virginia in 1854. Charlotte remained at Whitaker Plantation, increasingly isolated according to neighbors' accounts. Parish records show she became a significant contributor to the Presbyterian Church, funding a new wing and stained glass windows. In 1858, a curious entry appears in the ledgers of a private investigative firm in Philadelphia. The partially preserved records, discovered during a library archival project in 1953, show that someone from Wilkes County, Georgia, name redacted, commissioned an investigation into persons of mixed race, claiming education in Pennsylvania or New York states, female approximately 15 years of age, accompanied by a woman formerly of Georgia, aged approximately 40 years. The investigation's results are not recorded, but a final payment was made in February 1859, suggesting it concluded. 2 months later, Charlotte Whitaker sold Whitaker Plantation and most of its holdings. According to county records, she moved to Savannah, where she purchased a townhouse on Abercorn Street. She lived there in increasing seclusion until her death in 1867. Her will, preserved in Chatham County records, left the bulk of her estate to her only surviving son, William Montgomery Whitaker, with substantial donations to the Presbyterian Church in Savannah, and curiously to a school for disadvantaged girls in Philadelphia. William Whitaker married into a prominent Savannah family in 1865 and fathered 3 children. His descendants remained influential in Georgia until the early 20th century. Nothing in public records suggests he ever acknowledged the events surrounding his birth or the possibility of a third sibling. However, family correspondence preserved by descendants and donated to the Georgia Historical Society in 1948 includes a letter from William to his wife, dated 1870, in which he mentions troubling dreams. "I am again visited by that strange dream of a woman I've never met, with eyes so like my own, calling to me from across a great distance." Mother always dismissed such fancies, insisting they were merely the product of childhood fever, yet they persist with such clarity that I sometimes wonder if there is some memory trying to surface from my earliest days. The story might have remained completely buried were it not for the discovery made during a highway expansion project near the former Whitaker property in 1956. Construction workers uncovered a small, unmarked grave, approximately half a mile from where the Plantation house once stood. According to county coroner reports, the remains were those of an infant, estimated to have died in the 1840s. No further investigation was conducted, and the remains were reinterred in the county cemetery with a simple marker: "Unknown child, c. 1840s. The discovery received only a brief mention in the local newspaper and was soon forgotten. A final piece of this fractured narrative emerged in 1965, when a historian researching the Underground Railroad discovered records from a Quaker settlement in Pennsylvania. Among these was a ledger entry from October 1843, noting the arrival of R.T. from Georgia with infant daughter. Further entries track R.T. receiving literacy lessons and eventually working as a seamstress. The last mention comes from 1861, recording that R.T. and daughter E. have relocated to Canada in light of concerns regarding the Fugitive Slave Act enforcement. No further trace of them has been found in historical records. What became of this daughter, presumably the third Whitaker child, remains unknown. Did she ever learn of her origins? Did she know about her brothers in Georgia? The historical record falls silent, but in 1876, a curious notice appeared in a Savannah newspaper. A woman identifying herself only as E. placed an advertisement seeking information about the Whitaker family, formerly of Wilkes County. The notice ran for 3 weeks and was never answered, at least not publicly. Throughout the construction of this narrative, one question persists: why did Charlotte Whitaker reject her third child? Medical records and correspondence provide clues, but no definitive answer. Letters between Charlotte and her mother years before her marriage reveal anxiety about her maternal grandfather, who was described as having the Mediterranean complexion. Dr. Harrison's private notes mention Colonel Whitaker's concern about his wife's family history and potential complications in her bloodline. In the racial hierarchy of antebellum Georgia, such complications could destroy a family's social standing and legacy. The story of the Whitaker triplets reminds us that the most profound horrors are not supernatural, but emerge from human hearts and social systems. What psychological toll did these events exact on everyone involved? Charlotte, living with her secret and fear of discovery. Ruth Ann, risking everything to save a child. The twins, one of whom died young while the other lived with inexplicable dreams and sensations. And what of the third child, raised far from Georgia, perhaps never knowing her full story? These questions echo across time, unanswered. Today, the former Whitaker plantation is part of a national forest. Nothing remains of the original structures except stone foundations overgrown with kudzu and pine. Hikers occasionally report an unusual heaviness in the air around the old house site, a sensation of being watched from the dense woods that have reclaimed the land. Local historians attribute such feelings to the knowledge of what once occurred there, the weight of history pressing down. Others suggest it is merely the Georgia heat playing tricks on visitors' senses. In 1969, all records related to the Whittaker family were catalogued and archived at the University of Georgia. The archivist's notes indicate several pages appeared to have been removed from Charlotte's personal diaries before donation, and Ruth Ann's journal fragments show evidence of pages torn out. Some stories remain deliberately fragmented, pieces missing by design rather than by accident of history. Perhaps the full truth of what transpired at Whittaker Plantation in 1843 will never be known. But in the spaces between the documented facts, in the silences and omissions, we can discern the outlines of a human tragedy born of social pressure, prejudice, and the desperate measures taken to preserve appearances. The descendants of William Whittaker continue to live throughout the American South, many unaware of the circumstances surrounding their ancestors' birth. As for potential descendants of the third child, the one spirited away to Pennsylvania and then to Canada, they may walk among us, carrying a history they never learned, connected to a family that never acknowledged them. The past is never truly buried, merely waiting beneath the surface, its weight shifting the ground beneath our feet in ways we seldom perceive. In the archives of the Georgia Historical Society, the fragments of Ruth Ann Turner's journal rest in a climate-controlled drawer, preserved under glass. The handwriting, determined and purposeful despite limited literacy, tells a story of courage amid impossible circumstances. The final legible words, partially obscured but carefully transcribed by conservators, read, "They may erase us from their books, but our blood still flows, our story still lives." North Star, guide us now to where truth can breathe free. Perhaps the most profound horror lies not in what we know of this story, but in how many similar stories remain untold, buried in unmarked graves, or hidden in redacted records across the country. The Whittaker triplets represent countless other lives, shaped and sometimes destroyed by the societal structures of their time, structures whose shadows still lengthen across the present day. The past is never as distant as we might wish it to be. It lives in our institutions, our families, our DNA, and sometimes in dreams we cannot explain. As twilight falls over the Georgia pines and darkness settles across the former Whittaker lands, one might imagine three children, separated by circumstance and society, but forever connected by blood, looking up at the same stars, their lives flowing in different directions, like streams from a single source. One path ended abruptly in childhood. Another led to wealth and position in Southern society. The third disappeared into the north, like a tributary flowing toward a distant sea. All three shaped by a single night in September 1843, when a woman made a choice, another woman defied it, and the consequences echoed across generations. County records show that in 1958, a woman from Toronto visited the Wilkes County Courthouse, requesting information about the Whittaker family. She left no name, but the clerk remembered her because of her striking eyes, an unusual shade between grey and green. The clerk reported that when told most records from that period had been damaged or lost, the woman simply nodded as if expecting this answer, then asked directions to the old plantation site. What she sought there, and whether she found it, no one knows. Like so many threads in this narrative, this one too disappears into the fabric of history, leaving only questions that whisper in the Georgia night. In the silence that follows such stories, we are left to wonder not only about the facts that history has preserved, but also about those it has obscured. The quiet courage, the secret sins, the children who grew up never knowing their true origins, and the bonds of blood that transcend the categories humans create to divide one another. Perhaps somewhere, even now, descendants of all three Whitaker children live their lives, connected by an invisible thread they cannot see but might sometimes feel, tugging at the edges of dreams or in moments of inexplicable recognition when looking into a stranger's eyes. The past is never truly past. It breathes beneath the soil of the present, feeding roots that reach into our lives in ways we may never fully understand. The story of Charlotte Whitaker, Ruth Ann Turner, and the three children born on that September night in 1843 reminds us that every family has its secrets, every community its silences, and every historical narrative its carefully maintained omissions. In these shadows, the true horror often lies, not in what is seen, but in what remains deliberately unseen, not in what is remembered, but in what has been systematically forgotten. In the archives of the Georgia Historical Society, the fragments of Ruth Ann Turner's journal rest in a climate-controlled drawer, preserved under glass. The handwriting, determined and purposeful despite limited literacy, tells a story of courage amid impossible circumstances. The final legible words, partially obscured but carefully transcribed by conservators, read, "They may erase us from their books, but our blood still flows, our story still lives." North Star, guide us now to where truth can breathe free. Perhaps the most profound horror lies not in what we know of this story, but in how many similar stories remain untold, buried in unmarked graves, or hidden in redacted records across the country. The Whitaker triplets represent countless other lives, shaped and sometimes destroyed by the societal structures of their time, structures whose shadows still lengthen across the present day. The past is never as distant as we might wish it to be. It lives in our institutions, our families, our DNA, and sometimes in dreams we cannot explain. As twilight falls over the Georgia pines and darkness settles across the former Whitaker lands, one might imagine three children, separated by circumstance and society, but forever connected by blood, looking up at the same stars, their lives flowing in different directions, like streams from a single source. One path ended abruptly in childhood. Another led to wealth and position in Southern society. The third disappeared into the north, like a tributary flowing toward a distant sea. All three shaped by a single night in September 1843, when a woman made a choice, another woman defied it, and the consequences echoed across generations. In 1958, according to Wilkes County administrative logs, a woman from Toronto visited the courthouse requesting information about the Whitaker family. She left no name, but the clerk remembered her because of her striking eyes, an unusual shade between grey and green, reminiscent of the Whitaker family portraits that once hung in the County Historical Society. The clerk noted in his personal diary, discovered during an estate sale in 1962, that when told most records from that period had been damaged or lost, the woman simply nodded as if expecting this answer, then asked directions to the old plantation site. What she sought there, and whether she found it, no one knows. Like so many threads in this narrative, this one too disappears into the fabric of history, leaving only questions that whisper in the Georgia night. What we do know comes from an unusual source, the field notes of Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, an anthropologist who studied oral histories in rural Georgia between 1957 and 1960. Her papers, donated to Emory University in 1968, shortly before her death, contain an interview with an elderly groundskeeper who maintained the Presbyterian cemetery where the Whitakers were buried. According to this man, identified only as Mr. J., the woman from Toronto spent 3 days visiting the cemetery and the former plantation grounds. On the third day, he observed her placing 3 white roses on William Whitaker's grave. When he approached, she was weeping silently. "She told me she had family here once," Mr. J. recalled in the interview. "When I asked who, she just said, 'No one who would have claimed me.' Before she left, She asked if I knew about any children's graves, unmarked ones, near the old plantation. I told her about the small grave they found during the highway work. She thanked me and left the next day. Strangest thing, she left a sealed letter with me to put on Colonel Whitaker's grave. Said it was a family matter. I did what she asked, but rain came that night. By morning the letter was gone, just melted away like it was never there. This account raises intriguing questions. If this woman was indeed a descendant of the third Whitaker child, what brought her to Georgia after all those years? What did the letter contain? And why leave it at the grave of Colonel Whitaker rather than Charlotte's? The groundskeeper's account suggests she knew more about the family history than most, including details not widely known at the time. Local newspaper archives from that week make no mention of a Canadian visitor, but they do report an unusual incident. A small fire at the county records office that damaged several 19th century deed books. The fire was attributed to faulty wiring, but its timing, the very night after the Toronto woman's last reported visit to the courthouse, raises questions that may never be answered. A deeper layer of this story emerged in 1962, when renovations to the old Savannah home, once owned by Charlotte Whitaker, uncovered a hidden compartment beneath a window seat in the master bedroom. Inside was a small tin box containing a child's leather shoe, approximately sized for a 3-year-old, and a folded piece of paper. The paper, according to the contractor who found it, contained a list of dates, the last being October 12, 1843. The date Ruth Ann Turner was reported to have fled. Beside it was written what appeared to be a tally of miles, ending with the word Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, the contractor's wife, finding the items worthless, discarded them before historians could examine them. Only the man's description, given to a local reporter for a small human interest story, preserves any record of their existence. The psychological weight carried by those who maintained this secret must have been immense. Charlotte Whitaker's medical records, fragmentary as they are, show increasing prescriptions for laudanum and other sedatives throughout her later life. Her physician in Savannah noted in 1862 that she suffered from nervous exhaustion and recurring nightmares, and often spoke in her sleep of a child in the woods and someone watching from the trees. Whether these were manifestations of guilt, fear, or something else entirely remains a matter of conjecture. Colonel Whitaker's role in these events is particularly ambiguous. His business ledgers show regular payments to various investigators over the years, but their purposes are never specified. After his death, Charlotte destroyed most of his personal correspondence, according to her lady's maid's testimony preserved in church records. What he knew, what he suspected, and what actions he took remain largely hidden from history. The circumstances of his death, a riding accident in which he was found with a broken neck at the bottom of a ravine on the property, were never thoroughly investigated. The local doctor who examined the body noted only that death appears to have been instantaneous and that the colonel's face wore an expression of extreme distress. William Whitaker, the surviving twin, or possibly Thomas if Dr. Harrison's confused records are to be believed, grew up under the shadow of these events, though perhaps unconsciously. His school records from Virginia show an intelligent but troubled young man who suffered from insomnia and what his headmaster called a melancholy disposition inappropriate to his years. He excelled academically, but struggled socially, preferring his own company to that of his peers. A letter from his roommate to his parents, preserved in a private collection and made available to researchers in 1970, describes William as often waking in the night, claiming to have heard a woman calling his name from outside the window. When I look, there is never anyone there, but he remains convinced. After graduating, William briefly attended medical school in Philadelphia, but withdrew after less than a year. His letter to his mother explaining this decision has been preserved. The dissection rooms disturb me more than I can express. Last week, upon uncovering the subject, a young colored woman, I was seized with such violent trembling that I had to be escorted from the room. I cannot explain this reaction, but I know I cannot continue in this profession. He subsequently entered law and built a successful practice in Savannah, specializing, ironically, in family estate matters. Descendants of William Whittaker have occasionally shown interest in their family history, though none appear to have uncovered the full story. In 1937, William's granddaughter commissioned a family genealogy that traced the Whittaker line back to England, but made only passing mention of the twins, noting that Thomas died in childhood of fever. No mention was made of any third child. When interviewed for a county historical project in 1954, William's elderly son James stated that his grandmother Charlotte was a deeply religious woman who maintained strict discipline in the household, and that his father rarely spoke of his childhood. The possible descendants of the third child remain untraced. If Ruth Ann Turner and the infant girl indeed reached Pennsylvania and later Canada, they likely changed their names and perhaps their identities entirely. Census records from Toronto in the 1870s list several mixed-race families who had come from the United States, but none can be definitively connected to Ruth Ann or her charge. The trail grows cold at the Canadian border, obscured by the passage of time and the deliberate erasure of connections to the past that many escaped enslaved people understandably practiced. What became of the potential third line of Whittaker descendants? There is one tantalizing clue. In 1948, a woman named Eleanor Turner published a small volume of poetry in Montreal titled Blood Memory. The poems speak of dreams of cotton fields I've never seen and brothers lost across a line I cannot cross. The author's biography stated only that she was born in Toronto to parents who had come from farther south. One poem, titled simply Georgia, reads in part, "In dreams I walk a red clay road to a house I've never entered, where my face looks back at me from portraits of strangers. Is this merely coincidence, or could Eleanor Turner have been a descendant of Ruth Ann and the third Whittaker child?" The book is now extremely rare, with only 3 known copies in existence, all in private collections. The physical landscape that witnessed these events has changed dramatically over the years. The Whittaker plantation house burned to the ground in 1879, long after the family had left. The land was parceled and sold multiple times before finally becoming part of a state wildlife management area in 1952. Hikers and hunters who venture into the more remote sections occasionally report finding old brick foundations, remnants of outbuildings, and once, according to a 1966 newspaper account, a small stone marker with no inscription, surrounded by wild roses that bloom white even when no other roses grow in the area. Forest Service employees have never been able to locate this marker during subsequent searches. The psychological landscape of this story, the interior spaces where Charlotte Whittaker made her decision, where Ruth Ann Turner defied it, where the separated triplets lived their disconnected lives, remains even more elusive. We can only imagine the complex interplay of social pressure, racial ideology, family obligation, personal fear, and mother's intuition that drove Charlotte to deny her third child. Similarly, we can only speculate about the courage and moral clarity that motivated Ruth Ann to risk everything for an infant who was, in the eyes of the law and society, not even considered fully human. What would drive a woman to reject her own child? Historical context provides some answers. In antebellum Georgia, a child of visibly mixed race born to a white plantation mistress would have destroyed the family's social standing and possibly led to violence. Charlotte's position, wealth and identity depended entirely on maintaining racial boundaries that such a birth would have irrevocably breached. Yet the emotional cost of this calculation must have been enormous. Her subsequent religious devotion, increasing reclusiveness, and dependence on sedatives suggest a woman haunted by her choices. Similarly, what would motivate Ruth Ann Turner to take such risks? Beyond basic human compassion, did she see in this infant a chance to strike back at a system that had claimed her own freedom? Or was her action simply a mother's instinct to protect a vulnerable child, regardless of circumstances? The fragments of her journal suggest a woman of remarkable strength and moral conviction, but the full complexity of her motivations remains hidden in the spaces between her carefully written words. The story of the Whittaker triplets illuminates the profound horrors that human societies can inflict through rigid hierarchies and boundaries, horrors that require no supernatural elements to chill the blood. It reminds us that the most terrifying monsters are not those that lurk in darkness, but those that live in human hearts and minds, shaped by social systems that demand impossible choices and extract unbearable costs. In 1967, during an oral history project focused on descendants of enslaved people, an interviewer in Ontario, Canada, recorded the testimony of an elderly woman who claimed her grandmother had come from Georgia, carrying secrets that could burn down a house. The woman, whose name was redacted in the published collection at her request, recounted a family story about her grandmother being rescued as an infant and taken north by a woman who chose freedom for them both. She described a family tradition of placing 3 white roses in flowing water on the same day each September, though she said the meaning of this ritual had been lost over generations. Could this be yet another thread of the Whittaker story? The dates align, and the symbolism of 3 white roses echoes the 3 children born that September night in 1843. But like so many aspects of this narrative, this connection remains tenuous, a possibility rather than a certainty. History, especially for those systematically excluded from its official records, often exists in such fragments and echoes, preserved through family stories and symbolic practices whose original meanings fade with time. The final documented reference to anyone potentially connected to this story comes from a church bulletin in Savannah, dated March 1867. It notes the passing of Mrs. Charlotte Whittaker, widow of Colonel James Whittaker, and mentions that she died peacefully in her sleep, though the household staff reported hearing her speak repeatedly of forgiveness in her final hours. The brief obituary concludes with a quotation reportedly chosen by Charlotte herself for her funeral service, from the Gospel of Matthew. "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" Whether this biblical selection reflected genuine remorse, a lifetime of religious justification, or something else entirely is yet another question that history cannot definitively answer. Like so many aspects of this story, it remains suspended between what is known and what can only be imagined, the space where the truest horrors often reside. Today, all the principal figures in this narrative rest in their graves. Charlotte and James Whittaker lie in Savannah's historic Bonaventure Cemetery, their impressive marble tombstone standing as a testament to their social position. The surviving twin, William, or possibly Thomas, rests nearby, his grave marked with the dates 1843 to 1902, and the epitaph, "Beloved Father, Husband, Son." The grave of Thomas, or possibly William, who died at age 5, lies in the family plot in Wilkes County, a small stone worn nearly smooth by time and weather. The unmarked grave discovered during highway construction in 1956, possibly that of an infant who died on the plantation around the same time, though perhaps not connected to this story at all, is now beneath the asphalt of a Georgia state highway, cars passing over it daily, their drivers unaware. As for Ruth Ann Turner and the child she may have saved, they have no known graves, no markers, no coordinates where one might lay flowers in remembrance. Their lives after that October night in 1843 exist largely in the realm of possibility rather than documented fact. Yet their absence from official records is itself a kind of testament to courage, to defiance, to the human capacity to choose freedom over security and moral truth over social convention. The story of the Whittaker triplets reminds us that history is not merely what is recorded in official documents, but also what has been deliberately omitted, carefully hidden, systematically erased. It exists in the negative spaces, in the silences between journal entries, in the pages torn from diaries, in the family stories that change slightly with each generation. The horror lies not only in what was done, but in how thoroughly it was concealed, and in how many similar stories may have left no traces at all. As night falls over Georgia, from the mountains to the sea, one might imagine these separated siblings, divided by circumstance, society, and the choices of others, somehow still connected across time and space. The surviving twin who lived his life in Georgia, haunted by dreams he couldn't understand. The child who died young, perhaps the wrong twin, misidentified in the confusion of grief. And the third child, spirited away to the north, perhaps growing to adulthood never knowing her origins, yet carrying them in her blood and bones, in the color of her eyes, in dreams of places she had never seen. 3 lives that began together in a single night, then scattered like seeds on different winds. One remaining rooted in southern soil, one cut short before it could truly grow, one transplanted to distant ground where it might flourish away from the shadows of its origins. All 3 shaped by decisions made in moments of crisis, fear, and courage. Decisions whose consequences would echo through generations, creating ripples that continue to touch shores far distant from their source. The true horror of this story, and perhaps its strange beauty as well, lies in its unresolved nature, in the questions it raises but cannot answer, in the fragments that suggest a whole we can never fully reconstruct. Like the partial journals, the water-damaged letters, the lost grave markers, the stories passed down through generations with details altered or forgotten, we are left with an incomplete picture that our minds strive to complete. In that effort of imagination, in the attempt to understand choices made under pressures we can only partially comprehend, we confront the most profound horror of all. The recognition that under similar circumstances we too might make decisions that would haunt us for a lifetime and beyond. What became of the third Whittaker child? Did she live a full life in Canada, free from the shadows of her origins? Did she have children of her own, grandchildren, descendants who walk among us today, carrying a history they may never know? Did William Whittaker ever suspect the truth about his birth and the sibling who disappeared? Did Charlotte Whittaker find the forgiveness she reportedly sought in her final hours? Did Ruth Ann Turner ever regret her dangerous choice, or did she consider it the defining act of courage in a life constrained by circumstances beyond her control? These questions have no definitive answers, but in asking them, we acknowledge the humanity of those who lived this story, their fears, hopes, failings, and moments of unexpected bravery. As historians, we piece together fragments of evidence to construct narratives about the past. But we must always remember that these narratives are approximations, attempts to make sense of lives lived in all their messy, contradictory complexity. The story of the Whittaker triplets, with its gaps and silences, reminds us of how much remains unknown, How many stories have been lost or deliberately buried? How the full truth of the past may lie forever beyond our reach. Yet even in its incompleteness, this story matters. It speaks to the terrible costs of rigid social hierarchies, the impossible choices faced by those caught within them, and the occasional, remarkable courage of individuals who defied those systems at great personal risk. It reminds us that the past is never simply past, but continues to shape the present in ways both visible and hidden. In the end, the most profound horror in the story of Charlotte Whittaker, Ruth Ann Turner, and the 3 children born on that September night in 1843 may be the recognition that similar stories continue to unfold, different in their specifics but similar in their essence, wherever human beings draw lines between us and them. Wherever social systems demand that natural human connections be severed in service to artificial hierarchies, wherever parents and children face impossible choices dictated by circumstances beyond their control. And perhaps most importantly, it challenges us to look more deeply at our own society, to question what stories we might be hiding from ourselves, what truths we might be unwilling to face, what boundaries we maintain at terrible human cost. As we turn away from this fractured narrative, its pieces imperfectly assembled from the fragments history has preserved, we might do well to remember that the past is never truly buried. It lives on in archives and attics, in family resemblances and unexplained dreams, in patterns of privilege and disadvantage that persist across generations. The true legacy of the Whittaker triplets, and countless others whose stories have been similarly fragmented or erased, continues to shape our world in ways we are only beginning to understand. The Georgia pines still whisper in the wind. The red clay still holds its secrets. And somewhere, perhaps, descendants of all 3 children born that night continue to live their lives, separated by the choices of others, yet connected by bonds that transcend time, distance, and all human efforts to sever them.